Whole Bible readers, welcome to week 19. Now let's acknowledge something. We've been through the holidays. Probably we've been very busy. I've talked to some people, just was having a conversation right before I started making this video about, I was falling behind, but I took some time. I had some time off. I was able to get caught up. I hope that's the case for you. If not, there's a lot of things you can do. One is to take some extra time and get caught up. It's okay to sit down for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, and just read straight through. Don't feel like you've got to remember everything, right? That's not the point. The point is to just soak it all in as best you can. Don't be ashamed to use the highlights that we suggest every week and use that as a way to maybe focus and learn some of the material, experience some of the material without having to take the time to read everything that you've had to skip. The other thing to do, and this is fine, just pick up where you left off. At the end of the day with this program, if you don't read everything, you still will have read a lot more than you would have if you hadn't participated. And that's the point. The Bible is going to be there. You're going to continue to read it. Hey, hint, we're going to be reading this book in eternity and still talking about how amazing it was. But, it'll be taught by better people than like the folks who wrote it, that kind of thing. Okay. All right. Now let's talk about what we're doing in week 19. In this week, we are moving into some of the so-called minor prophets. Now, we call them minor prophets not because they're unimportant, but just because their books are shorter. In the Hebrew Bible, these are called the Book of the 12 because they were put in one scroll and there were 12 of them, and that probably was a deliberate choice. So we're going to begin reading the ones who are earlier, who are contemporaries of Isaiah, whom we just read, and the ones that you're reading this week are probably mostly contemporaries of Isaiah. We haven't picked up all of those contemporaries, and a couple of them we're not exactly sure where they belong. So we're going to be reading Hosea, first of all, who's the longest of these shorter prophets. Hosea is a prophet in northern Israel, which he calls Ephraim, referring to the whole nation by the leading tribe there. And he compares Israel to a sexually unfaithful woman. This is something that a number of the prophets do, but Hosea does it in the biggest way, treating Israel's idolatry and Israel's foreign alliances as ways in which they're breaking trust with God, not trusting in God, not remaining loyal to God, like a sexually promiscuous wife, for example. Now, the amazing thing is in this book we read that God tells Hosea to marry a woman who has been promiscuous, and to make her his wife. And then she continues in her life of promiscuity and perhaps prostitution and ends up sold into slavery. And again, the amazing thing, God says, go redeem her from slavery and take her back. So this illustrates God's persistent faithfulness to Israel, even when Israel is unfaithful. This is such a comforting message. God continues to love us and pursue us, even though we are unfaithful to him. I don't think that we can emphasize that enough. We're going to read Amos, and Amos is maybe the greatest orator of all of the prophets. He's also a prophet to the northern kingdom, though he comes from Judah. And where Hosea gives attention to religious unfaithfulness, Hosea gives attention to social injustice, to the abuse of the poor, the widow, the orphan, the foreigner. He uses a lot of really strong rhetoric that condemns injustice. He talks about the sins of the pagan nations and says what should happen to them. And of course the answer is judgment. And then, okay, Israel, let's talk about your sins. And it really comes home in that way. But extolling God's justice, it's here that we read about justice rolling down like many waters. So a beautiful and compelling book for many people, one of their favorites in the Old Testament. Joel is a short book. We're not sure exactly where it belongs historically. It describes a locust plague, which is a terrible thing because it leads to famine. But then it moves into a description of a military invasion, and we don't know if maybe the locust plague is really used as a kind of a figure of speech for that invasion. So it's a warning of a coming disaster or disasters, but then that's followed by the promise that God will give his Spirit to all of his people, fulfilling the plan that he's had from the beginning to have all of his people be his prophets, to be his spokespeople. And that will usher in the day of the Lord when God has complete victory over evil. Obadiah is the shortest of the minor prophets, just one chapter. He gives us a short oracle against Edom, one of Israel's neighbors, a related tribe. And why are they being judged? Because they will participate with the Babylonians in the destruction of Jerusalem. This is an interesting thing. Even though these other nations are doing bringing God's judgment as they destroy Jerusalem eventually, God judges them for their cruelty, for their violence. No one escapes the judgment, the righteousness of God. So as you're reading, remember the prophetic perspective here. That the prophets are helping us understand what the Lord has taught us and what he is doing so that we will turn to him, trust in him, be ready to endure what is coming, and be ready for him, hopeful for him to make things right, just as he promised. But don't put this off because it's urgent. It needs to be done now. Happy reading.